Greetings, Earthlings and humans and all sentient beings, as well as all animals who love the sound of my voice. Keep sending me those videos of your animals loving on my podcast because they love my voice, because they realize that an intelligent life form, animals are very, very intelligent themselves, so they know that a voice of intelligence has pierced this veil of unified bullshit. So keep sending me those videos that verify that the intelligence of animals. And welcome to the Roseanne Barr podcast.
Oh, you see, my patience is growing thin.
Well, today's show is going to be one of the biggest bangers we've ever had. We're so excited. It's more than a banger. It's a boom, boom, boom banger. We have such a great guest, somebody that I have admired my entire life, and even before this life, I think, but just a great person, RFK Jr. Hi, RFK Jr.
Hey, Roseanne, thank you so much for having me, and the admiration is mutual. You've had an amazing life, and you've created an amazing life. You have the life that God gave you, which was just... You know, it was interesting, and and you have the life that you made up for yourself, which is even it's heroic. So thank you.
Well, that's so sweet. That is very touching to me. You are. I don't even know where to start, but we'll just converse and see where it goes, because I know it's going to go to some big places. You're somebody I've wanted to talk to for a very long time, and I've watched all your other interviews, and I'm always amazed at the spectacular amount of knowledge you've got in that brain of yours, and how you remember it all, I don't know, but yet you do. And
I forget my wallet and my keys every time I leave the house.
Are you on the autism spectrum at all?
No, I'm not. I think I'm the opposite of that. I think I'm very. I mean, I'm very conscious of my surroundings. I'm very. I think I'm very intuitive about what other people are thinking and how people react to me. So there are some things that my wife would like me to be more conscious of, but I think I came around at a time when autism was very rare in my generation, which is 70-year-old men. It's about one in, depending on what studies you read, it's about 1 in 2,500 to 1 in 10,000. In my kids' generation, which you're much closer to,
I'm older than you. Oh, that's
so smooth.
That's
that
hard
was
to believe.
very flattering.
It's 1 in 34.
I know.
And in some of the states that really have granular data, it's down to 1 in 22 boys. So it's very, very alarming, that explosion.
I do want to go into that, and we'll discuss what we think causes
I've read
it.
that you've said that you're on the spectrum, but I would never have made that diagnosis, having the little that I know of you.
Well, it's and this way I thought to ask you, because it's kind of like a dog that has a bone and they don't let go of it till they've picked off every piece of meat on it. You know, you just research, and autists in these days that are a lot of anonymous and a lot of researchers, they want to know why, and so they dig deeper, and they don't let go of that bone until they're satisfied with the information that's not readily available.
Well,
that's why I thought, I thought you did.
Yeah, I definitely have that.
So it's a need to know, a want to know, and the desire to do the footwork to uncover it. So that's why I thought it kind of described you to a T, because the stuff that you tell us about autism itself and the kind of forced vaccinations of our children, how that kind of coincidentally increased at those same times. You had to dig really deep into medical information to find that. And And so that's why I thought you were like a dog with a bone on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I do have that. And that may be, I think I may be a little ADHD because I have very good concentration. And when I'm focused on something, it is irrelevant what's going on around me,
Right.
the chaos around me. You know, my wife needs to get everything kind of calm and neat before she can focus. And I was raised, you know, I have 11 brothers and sisters, 11 of us all together. I was raised in a very chaotic environment, and I can focus very easily through that chaos. But you know, it's interesting. My uncle, President Kennedy, when he was a young senator, he met his wife Jackie Bouvier, and he met her. She was a reporter for a newspaper, and she did these kind of profiles of famous figures and people met in the street. And she asked in her first interview with my uncle, she asked him what he thought his best quality was. She thought he was going to say courage because he had been a war hero. Right. He was the only president who's won the Purple Heart. And then he had written a book and won a Pulitzer Prize for Profiles in Courage, which was about a group. It was about a series of stories about political leaders, mainly senators and congressmen, who had made life-changing choices that they knew were against their political interests, but were in the interest of our country. And they torched their political careers by doing something that was morally correct. So she assumed that he was going to say courage was his greatest asset. But instead he said curiosity. And I think, and I've thought about that a lot because I think that's what allowed him to be a peacemaker. He was able to put himself in the shoes of Khrushchev, of Castro, and others, and understand their motivations, that were rational motivations for making the choice that they made, rather than kind of these ideological constructs that are rooted in tribalism, where you just say everybody on that side is, you know, is dehumanized and evil. He just didn't believe that about people. He believed that, you know, whatever was happening in the Kremlin was a lot what was happening in Boston, you know, in the local political scene, where people were conniving against each other, where there was a ferment of different opinions, of different ambitions, of different agendas, and that it was not monolithic, which is what the CIA was telling him. And actually, at that time, the CIA knew nothing of what was happening in the Kremlin because there was a mole at Langley. So every time they turned a high-level Soviet official, he'd instantly be killed. And so the CIA was just making up their view of what was happening in the Kremlin because they had no inside information. And my uncle realized
Why were they doing that? Was that, it seems like it's still going on too, was that just to allow them to warmonger, sell more weapons?
You make these comic book depictions that this guy is pure evil and he wants world conquest. He's another Hitler, whether it was Castro, Saddam Hussein, Putin, Khrushchev, whatever. And then they sell that to the public and they frighten people. And then, as you know, once people are scared, it disables their capacity for critical thinking.
Yes,
they're easy to manipulate.
Yeah.
So I think
that's why they inflict trauma after trauma after trauma since, you know, way before 9/11. But since then, it's almost continuous.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's fear and tribalism are the primary mechanisms for manipulating large populations. And it's not accidental because the CIA spent hundreds of billions of dollars studying how to manipulate individuals and populations. And there was a series of programs in the end of the 1940s. The CIA was started in 1947, but in the 1950s, they launched, the first ones were called Operation Bluebird and Operation Artichoke. And then in the latter days, they became the MK programs, MK Ultra, MK Naomi, MK Dietrich, and a bunch of others. The MK stands for mind control.
Right, I know that.
And they were figuring out how to manipulate individuals.
Well, didn't it come from Operation Paperclip.
Yeah,
So they brought the Nazis
exactly.
over who had,
Exactly.
done all of these mind control experiments on captive populations in their concentration camps, and they've kept detailed accounts of how a mother would choose which child to die. I mean, it's so
Yeah.
nefarious, and they came over and took over our medical. They started the CIA. The SS, they came over, and that's where the CIA kind of came from, because it had another name, I can't remember it, but they
It was OSS
incorporated
during
Nazi techniques in their mind control.
Yeah, there was a revulsion throughout early until 1940. There was a revulsion among both Democrats and Republicans for secret police organizations.
Right.
They thought that those were inconsistent and antithetical to democracy. So they knew, Iran had Savak, the East Germans had the Stasi, the
Right.
Germans had the KGB, the Nazis had the Gestapo, and those were associated with totalitarian systems. And most American politicians believed that that any secret police organization would be destructive to a democracy. And so after World War II, OSS, they developed OSS during World War II, which was originally created to recover pilots who were lost, who were shot down, to get them out of the way and to recover them, or who were shot down over France or over the ocean or whatever, to spirit them back across enemy lines. And then it became an intelligence organization, but after World War II, it was disbanded because they thought this is a toxic system and we cannot afford it in a democracy. And then Truman reluctantly let it get started in 1947 because they realized they had the nuclear bombs, and that using those in war would be devastating. And so they didn't want a hot confrontation with the Russians, and they were fighting these brush fire rebellions all over the developing world, fighting between the communist and capitalist systems, the West and the East, and they didn't want to use the nukes, and they didn't want to deploy a standing army. So they thought the shortcut would be through an intelligence agency, and they created the CIA. But originally, the CIA was created as an espionage organization, which means intelligence gathering and analysis. It was not a dirty tricks. There was no clandestine services. It was not supposed to be
used on the
fixing
American
elections
public.
and
It wasn't supposed to be used on any American citizen.
No, that too. That's in its charter. But they then, and you're absolutely correct. The first mission in 1947, the first mission that the CIA was given was Operation Paperclip, which was otherwise called the rat lines, which is the spiriting high-level Nazi officials, and particularly people with scientific knowledge.
Yes.
People who had worked on the missile programs, people who worked on poison gas, on biological weapons, etc., to spirit them. And a lot of those people, the Nuremberg prosecutors wanted them, and the CIA was giving them new identities so they wouldn't be indicted and put on trial in Nuremberg. And they were sneaking them over here. They populated Fort Detrick with them. Fort Detrick was the laboratory in Maryland where they were developing chemical and biological weapons. And then they brought a lot of them out to New Mexico, et cetera, to work on the nuke program and the missile program. And they also were bringing the same kind of people over from Japan, because there was a whole other system there. So, and the culture at Fort Detrick and in that part of the CIA to this day reflects a lot of the ethics and the moral underpinnings and assumptions of those original Nazi progenitors who had such influence on the program.
Well, because they, I don't know how to say it, but they do practice a kind of a fake science because real science doesn't use captive populations, does it?
Well, you could do science with, human experimentation, and it actually
But
is
isn't that against the whole
yeah,
Geneva thing?
it's against. I mean, it's against all of our values as a country. The reason they wanted the Germans and the Japanese is that they were using it was a shortcut to really good data, because if you're experimenting on rats and monkeys, the data is not as high quality,
Right.
and it actually. In the Japanese were publishing all their data, and they did experiments. They had human experiments on 10,000 people who they killed. They would give them certain diseases, and then they would do live vivisections.
Right.
So they wanted to see what the disease was doing in a living person, and so they would give them Black Plague, or they'd give them cholera, or yellow fever, or any of these other deadly diseases. And then they would, without anesthetic, they would dissect them alive. And they did that with thousands and thousands. I wrote a book about it called the Wuhan Cover-Up. The
Wow.
Japanese perfected it more than anybody, and they were involving all the medical schools and all the universities in these experiments. All the doctors in Japan were implicated, as they were in Germany.
Right.
And they would publish their data, and they would publish it, but they would use a code word. If they were doing experiments on monkeys, they'd say it was a colobus monkey, or it was a langur monkey, or it was a spider monkey, or it was a rhesus monkey. But if they just used the word monkey without the species name, it was a human.
Boy.
So, and that's the code they were using to hide from the public that they were actually using humans. But any place in the scientific literature of that era, if it just says monkeys, it was actually mainly Chinese, Manchurians, and Russians who they had captured, and some Americans.
Mom, this episode with RFK is so good. He mentions ivermectin at some point. We want to take this opportunity to push the TWC emergency contagion kit, because we know they're going to start doing shit. They're going to drop bird flu or whatever's coming. This kit will protect your family. So tell them a little bit more.
You got to protect your family right now, because I'm telling you what, they're going to release all kind of crap on us, because
Yeah.
the voting, the supposed free elections are coming up again. So expect to be sick, locked in your house, and have no way to vote except for by mail. And I guess the U.S. Post Office is part of the whole friggin' RICO scam there.
Yeah.
But anyway, you need to get you a contagion emergency kit from the wellness company right away, because this kit is no joke. It's your frontline defense against whatever they're going to throw at us.
Yeah.
It comes packed with ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, Tamiflu, and budesonide, along with a nebulizer. And, you can rest easy knowing you have your emergency meds on hand, and you get a guidebook for safe use. Every family in America needs to get at least one of these here kits. It's like having urgent care in your home with you. So, and the money you save by going to the doctor, you're saving a ton of money. And stay away from the hospitals too. You don't want to go there, because they'll shove that thing down your throat and you'll be gone. Anyway, so here's what you do. Go to twc.health/RB and get your contagion emergency kit for your family right now. That's twc.health/RB, and use the code RB. That's going to save you $30 at checkout. Hello. And these kits are only available in the USA. Man, that's mind-blowing. I just want to let that sit for a minute for people to digest it. And the Germans had done it,
Of course, the Germans. William Scherer's book, which is The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich,
I read that.
has
Yeah.
a whole chapter on those experiments, and they're extraordinary. It's heartbreaking to read.
It is.
But they were, there was a chapter that stuck with me for some reason, which is the Germans were particularly interested in cold weather war. because they were fighting the Russians, and they wanted to understand if somebody is near frozen to death, what's the best way to revive them? At what point does it become irreversible? How severe does the exposure have to be? So they would capture Russians or other soldiers from the other side, and they were, or of course they were using Jews and gypsies and other unwanted, what they called useless eaters, to do these experiments in the concentration camps. But they were also using prisoners. And there's one experiment that he describes in that book where they put these two Russians in a cold bath.
I saw it.
Filled with ice. And then they just watched them to see how long it would die. And the Russians, they were shocked about how tough they were. And the Russians would last forever in this cold ice where everybody else would die within an hour. The Russians would last overnight, 2 days, whatever, and they'd be talking to each other, and they recorded their conversations, and it's really it is heartbreaking and just riveting to read, how brave they were and how matter of fact they were about their own deaths and about the suffering they were undergoing. But it was those kind of experiments that gave them this extraordinary, that made them so desirable for the CIA, because they had real data on what all of these things did to human beings in detail.
And also the data, which my friends say that during the Inquisition and during the witch burnings, they kept the perpetrators kept great records on all that too. And now we see it and the Nazis had access to all that information, but now we see it replayed here, where we talk about, the eventual horrors that lead to, but how it starts as mind control of a, country and how to create mass formation.
Yeah, that's what they were doing. Two things. One is they were using psychedelic drugs, and they were using torture, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and a lot of other, and then propaganda, noise, torture, all of these things to manipulate individual behavior, to find out how long it took to break somebody's will, their spirit, make them confess, but also to create Manchurian candidates, which are essentially unwilling killers. How do you use hypnosis and other techniques to make an individual assassinate a leader or somebody else?
Well, it's to create an assassin.
What?
It's to create an assassin.
Yeah, to create an assassin. So they were doing that. And they were also then looking at how do you manipulate entire populations.
Right.
And you do that by sowing fear, sowing uncertainty, by destroying institutions, by locking people up, keeping them away from social situations, lying to them systematically through propaganda, etc. And they were interested in how do you essentially deconstruct a society,
right,
make it so disorganized, so chaotic that people will plead for a strong centralized control, and then you can drop that in on them from like a colonial project. And how would the CIA control a Latin American nation like Guatemala by through selective use of assassination, and then destroying business opportunities, sowing mistrust in all the institutions, the church, the hospitals, etc., capturing key leaders to use them as propagandists, etc. And it became formulaic. They understood how you can do that. And I think,
do you think sometimes I think, well, we perfected it in all the countries we did it in.
Yeah, and now we did it here.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. And all of the things that we did elsewhere, we've seen done in our country in the last few years. And unfortunately, the CIA has been given a lot of leeway because, as you pointed out, the CIA's charter forbids the CIA from doing any manipulation, any propaganda in our country, any manipulation in our country, any interference with the political process. And during I guess it was the 2020 election, when these 51 CIA officers signed the letter,
right,
saying Hunter Thompson's laptop was a Russian election interference hoax.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, how did that group, how were they assembled? And the recent Senate hearings show how they were assembled. They called, Anthony Blinken actually called the head of the CIA at that time and said, we need this help. And she assembled these 51 leaders, but it was what they were accusing the Russians of, they were actually doing.
Yeah.
They were doing election interference on the American people here. That was election interference. And so...
And no one's ever held to account for any of it.
No, and the mainstream media is all compromised now. And they want, this should outrage Americans. This should absolutely, we should be indignant. We should be with pitchforks and torches in Langley surrounding that place saying, how did this happen? And yet the mainstream media, there's not a ripple of even recognition that this was, even though it's all now out, Senate testimony, there's no defense of it. And yet you still have the consensus in the liberal media and in most Americans is that there was no, it was all Russian election interference. And it's kind of shocking to me.
It's staggering.
Yeah.
I guess, it works. I guess, it just works.
Yeah.
When you have...
and I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's, but it's irrelevant who they did this to.
Yeah.
If they do it to him, they're going to do it to everybody else. And, don't people see that?
Well, they already did do it to everybody else, and they're still, not putting the total pieces together.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the number of black men in America that this same justice system faked. How many innocent black men did they lock up just because they were looking for a black man? A black man. It's in Texas. It's record numbers. Things are being overturned right and left. They just did it
back in the day. You're saying
back in the day, yeah. But it still goes on.
What do you mean? Are you talking about?
I'm talking about black men who were, in America.
Who are in jail now, you mean?
And who were, in the last 3 decades, unjustly incarcerated when they were innocent.
Yeah, well, also,
And the evidence was doctored or withheld, from a corrupt justice system that just, the guy was running for re-election, so he didn't care.
But it was also systematic. And that, happened with Kamala in California.
Yeah.
But it was systematic. We passed 2 laws, one of them in 1986 and one of them in 1994. Both of them were written by Joe Biden. And the first one was the drug law, which was in the omnibus drug law. And that law did something extraordinary, which it gave penalties for crack cocaine that were 100 times longer than for powder cocaine. And it was because blacks were using crack cocaine and whites were using powder cocaine. So you could have somebody in Westchester County, a couple of miles from the Bronx, who, right on the border, a white kid who was arrested for powder cocaine and would get no prison sentence, and a black kid the same age arrested for crack cocaine in the Bronx, which was the preferred form of most available form, thanks again to the intelligence agency.
Yes, they brought it in.
Yeah, and the black kid would end up getting 10 years in jail.
Right.
And and then that was systematic. And then in 1994, we passed the omnibus.
And his kid's a crackhead. That's what's even more funny.
in 1994, that's a good point. In 1994, I think he's sober now, though. In 1994, they passed the Crime Act, which had the mandatory sentencing. It had 3 strikes, you're out. You had the super predator provisions, and that was all designed to lock up the entire black population.
Yeah.
And between those 2 bills, we doubled the amount of blacks in American prisons. So
Kamala let the big dirty secret slip. And I had this in my campaign when I ran in 2012 on a socialist platform, but she let the big secret slip. I said, part of my campaign was saying, they're locking up kids in their youth, mostly minority kids in their youth, and they're using them as prison labor. And the #1 manufacturer of U.S. house paint is prison labor, where they're paid 21 cents an hour to create, for a corporation. They're corporate slaves in prison. And Kamala let that slip, where she didn't let the guy out even though his term was over. And she goes, well, I need him for labor.
Well, what she actually did, and the point you're making is absolutely correct, but there was a case that went to the Supreme Court that said that the California prisons were illegally, unconstitutionally overcrowded.
Yes.
The Supreme Court ordered the state of California to release 5,000 prisoners who were imprisoned for nonviolent drug offenses.
Right.
They were mainly blacks.
Right.
And she repeatedly, again and again and again, defied that order. And when she was asked about it, she said, we need these for fire suppression. We need the prisoners. We need them for certain jobs, like you
slave
say,
labor.
For paint.
She comes from a slave-holding family in Jamaica, so it wasn't no big thing to her to use people for slave labor. And she probably owned a piece of the privatized prison herself. Don't most Democrats own privatized prison? Allegedly, like a lot of these Democrat senators and such, they're the things they're invested in, they should be investigated, because they're getting double kickbacks, and so are the Republicans. I mean, the things that our Congress is invested in are questionable, at least.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. The conflicts of interest are outrageous. Just going back to that last point, when Tulsi ran against Kamala, and I love Tulsi.
I love her too.
Yeah, she's
we
fantastic.
had her on. We love her. We had her on here. We love her.
I mean, she's so smart, so articulate, so she has such integrity. And she said that she made this point when she was running against Kamala. She said Kamala, I'm sorry, was putting people in jail, massive numbers for marijuana. Mm-hmm. And when she was asked, had she smoked marijuana, she laughed and said, essentially said, yeah.
Do they just want us all dead? It just seems like they do. They just want to kill a ton of people in our country. They just want us dead.
Who's they?
The government.
Yes.
What is your role in this?
I usually talk more, but I'm so fascinated. I'm just hanging back.
Yeah.
Keeping it on track.
He tries to keep me on the
keeps
map.
You on.
Yes.
I'm getting that part.
But you're
now.
telling him he's not keeping me in line.
Is that what you're doing? Because I'll step
I think
up.
he is.
No, but I wouldn't speculate about that, because I try never to make predictions, and I try never to speculate about why people do things. I just try to lay out the facts. And like in the Fauci book, I never look into his head and say, this is why he was doing it. I don't say, well, this is why Bill Gates is doing it. But as I said to you earlier, it's hard to figure out an innocent explanation for why this stuff is happening, or stuff like the border.
Yeah,
you go down to the border and you see so much evidence that they're letting let 7 million people in, and that they literally took down the fences. And there were 27 gaps in the wall that they bought the material for, and they ordered it stopped. And then it's hard to say, well, what is the innocent explanation for this? Nobody thinks it's good to let the Sinaloa drug cartel to control our immigration policy in this country. How could anybody? This isn't a Republican or Democrat issue. It's just obvious that this is a bad policy. It's crushing the social safety net in New York and Chicago.
Well, that's what I think they're trying to do, is just crush the social safety net of working class people and then replace them, because they want a day off and benefits, the American working class. So they just want that over, because we're in there, working people in America, they're not desperate enough.
We're going to have new eyeballs on this week with RFK, a whole new audience, and we can reach potentially new people and save them.
He's hot.
He's really
hot. I told my girlfriends, he's kind of hot. If I was still a woman instead of a postmenopausal hag, I'd go for him. I'm telling you what.
And he has the brainworm thing, so maybe he'd go for you too. Anyway, American Financing is one of my favorite companies. They've been in business for 25 plus years. They're family owned and operated. They help you get the equity out of your home. They save an average of $854 a month, which is about a $10,000 a year raise. And most importantly, and why I love them, Mom, is they do not take a commission. So when you go to refinance your house, they give you the best loan for you. They don't get a cut. They're paid for. They're owned by their family. They save an average. Just get this, $854. That is their average. So that's an extra $10,000 a year.
They don't end up taking your house away from you, do they?
No, they don't do any of that. They're legit. You can look them up. They're highly rated on Better Business Bureau. They have a long history. When they called us, they told me they were fans of this show, and they are. They knew stuff. They knew the allegedly such stuff, and I love pushing this company.
Well, me and your dad, we were broke and bankrupt, and we went to a similar place that helped get us out of debt, and that's why I like it, because it did help us. They didn't take our house neither.
No, and this is a mortgage lending company, American Financing. Like, you can actually call and try and get a loan for your house too. It's not just refinancing. But if you own a home and you are an American, which means you're struggling now under Biden, Harris, and the communist regime, you can actually pull equity out of your house. These are the guys that do it. They'll help you. There's no scheme.
Maybe they'll help get me some money so I can build that barn dominium. I want a barn dominium.
We actually probably could refinance. It's not a bad idea. It's really not. But you take the equity out of your home. It's basically free and found money. And, you might be able to even delay a couple mortgage payments if you sign up. So tell the people where to sign up. Let's get into it.
Well, this says here, I thought this was good. If you start today, you might be able to delay 2 mortgage payments. That's really good. That's big money. Call 866-890-8585. That's 866-890-8585. Or you can visit americanfinancing.net/Roseanne.
I wouldn't comment on that, on why they do it, because I never do that. But I would say one thing that is obvious is that that neither political party cares at all for working people in this country, and that they don't. Both of them are now owned by corporations, and they're the same corporations: BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. It's the military, it's the pharmaceutical companies, and that they're working for them, and that they're keeping us all at each other's throats because it distracts us. It's like the jangling keys. You're saying, look at this over here, and you're robbing the bank over here. Right. And all the wealth is going upward to BlackRock.
Yeah. All the public money is going into private pockets.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at what's happening to working people cannot afford to live in this country anymore.
That's right.
There's almost 60% of Americans can't put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency. And if you're in that cohort and the engine light comes on your car, it's the apocalypse. You're not going to be able to afford the mechanic. You're going to lose your ride to work. You're going to lose your job. And you're going to get evicted from your house, and you're going to end up on the sidewalk. Homeless. All those people on the sidewalk, they're not there because they're mentally ill. They're drug addicts. They're people who got two flat tires at the same time, or they got the engine light come on.
They're previous homeowners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're all, they have us all fighting over, like, abortion and guns and, and trans stuff and all of these issues that are kind of, they're a little bit marginal to the central concerns of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just robbing us blind.
They are totally robbing us blind.
Yeah, and they've destroyed the middle class. And, I grew up with a Democratic Party that was on the side of the cops and the firefighters and union people.
Labor, me too.
Union.
My dad and grandpa were, total labor people that were, that was the Democrat Party. And now you never even hear the word labor from the Democrat Party.
They're not. They work for Wall Street. They're not working. They don't care about labor in this country at all.
No, their labor to them are the, and then when
look what they're doing. They don't care about, the people who work at Amazon or Uber or any of the people who are trying to unionize right now. There's so many things the Democratic Party should be advocating for to rebuild the labor movement. Capitalism, I believe strongly in capitalism, but capitalism doesn't exist, does not function if the working people don't have a bargaining position.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's nobody to buy the stuff.
Right.
Right?
It's funny that Henry Ford said, he was giving his workers a living wage. They're making $5,000 a year. And he was asked by the other robber barons and the big auto companies, why are you paying them so much? And he said, I want every one of my workers to make enough to be able to buy one of my cars.
And that was like, they were like, I should have had a V8.
Yeah.
They were like, that's crazy talk.
Yeah.
But that's what built a middle class in America.
Exactly, which became the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. Because we had a middle class, people could afford homes. Once you own a home, you have equity. It means you can borrow money. And that way, if you have an entrepreneurial impulse, you can build a yoga studio or a sporting goods store or a bar, or a saloon, a restaurant. And we had this extraordinary ferment, the capitalist ferment in our country that made us the most powerful economic nation. When I was a kid, America owned 50% of the wealth on Earth.
Right, I remember that.
And now we're down to the low 30s, and the middle class is gone in our country. It's gone. It is gone. If you're middle class, now the top 1% owns more wealth than the 60% in the middle class. Mm-hmm. And if if you're middle class in this country, you cannot afford to live in America anymore.
I know.
And people, I talk to people every day.
And I want to say that isn't free market capitalism.
No, it's corporate crony capitalism.
That's right.
We have nothing. We do not have. It's all monopoly capitalism.
Yes, exactly.
You look at all these franchises. They're all owned, that have replaced our Main Street stores, and they're all run by Goldman and these other big companies that are just strip mining the wealth from the American middle class and taking away our sovereignty, our power, and it's all fixable. It's all fixable, but the Democrats can't fix it. The Republicans can't fix it. They're all part of the problem.
Well, they don't want to. I thought it was hopeful.
I think Trump wants to fix it.
Well, he does, yeah.
I think he has a good instincts, but he doesn't have the depth.
Oh, I think he does.
You think he does?
I think he does.
Then why did he go along with the COVID lockdown?
Well, I think
because he said, "I'll never do it," and then he did it. And he gets overwhelmed by his bureaucrats.
Yeah,
and then he had this incredible deal where he went to Korea and he walked across the DMZ.
That was pretty amazing.
And all the liberals attacked him because he met with Kim and everybody said, "Oh, he likes dictators." But then he came back and he created this agreement to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. And both Kim and at that time the president of South Korea was Moon Jae-in, and the two of them agreed, we're going to get rid of all nuclear weapons on this peninsula. How good would that be for the world? Then they went to President Xi in China, and he signed on to it.
Right.
And then John Bolton,
Yeah.
Mike Pompeo
Mm-hmm.
came to Trump and said, you can't do it. And he caved in. And he knew it was the right thing, but he didn't have the depth to say, I'm going to do it. And, and you guys are, what I think about him is that he has really good instincts. He had great instincts about the vaccines. He had great instincts about ivermectin. He had great instincts about not shutting down our society, the social distancing, the masking, and many other things. But I think he gets rolled by his bureaucrats because he doesn't have the depth of knowledge.
Do you think that's depth, or do
What?
you think that he does that because of depth, or maybe
I
other
think it's
reasons?
depth. I think he's like us, that he kind of has ADHD and he skips around. So I think he knows a lot of these issues on the surface, and he knows what to do. But when you get in a
also
when you get
when you're a creative person, when you have ideas, when you have ideas to make things better, you can't really fathom the malfeasance of people who don't.
And now what I would say, Roseanne,
maybe he does now.
yeah, maybe he does now. Except that the people he's talking about bringing in, like Jamie Dimon, are not the kind of people who,
I said that too, but
or John Bolton.
he came on and said,
He's now said he's not going to do
he
that.
said that he never
but
said
he told
that.
Bloomberg he was.
Yeah.
Let me tell you a little bit of history. When my uncle, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, my father disappeared for 13 days. We only lived 7 minutes from downtown. At that time, you could get from my house to the Justice Department in 7 minutes, and driving fast. We lived across the Potomac in McLean, but my father never came home for 13 days. He slept at the White House, and this was the 13 most perilous days in the history of our planet, because we were this close to nuclear exchange with the Russians. And there were 13 people in the committee that was meeting continuously to figure out what to do. It was called the XCOM Committee. And the first day they voted, and it was 11-13 to invade Cuba.
Right.
My uncle started saying, and the only two people who didn't want to invade at that point were my father and Robert McNamara. And my uncle said to the CIA, he said, let me see the aerial photos. And he started studying himself the aerial photos of the missile sites. There was 64 missile sites. And he said, how many men are on each of these missile sites? And they said it may be 600 men to man each site. And he said, are they Cubans or are they Russians? And they said, well, we don't know, but we think they have to be Russians. My uncle said, if we bomb those sites, we kill all those Russians, isn't Khrushchev going to have to go into Berlin? And that's going to be the beginning of World War III. And they said, we don't think he has the guts to do that. So that's the level of their depth in decision making. And my uncle said, we got to figure out something else. They met for 13 days. And then, my uncle and father figured out how to do it. This extraordinary story about how to bring an end to it through an embargo and through a secret agreement with Khrushchev that we would remove our missiles, our Jupiter missiles, from Turkey secretly if he agreed to pull the missiles out of Cuba. And he ultimately agreed because he didn't want to go to war either. My uncle installed a hotline at that time where he could talk directly to Khrushchev because he knew all the people around him wanted a war. But he was able to stand up to his bureaucrats. And in fact, the last day, he said to the XCOM committee, let's take a final vote. The XCOM committee voted 8-6 at that point to invade. And my uncle said the 6 is a habit. So in other words, whatever they said, he wasn't going to do. He made up his own mind about what was going to happen, and he did that. And I don't think, I think he was able to do that because he had a military background himself. He mistrusted the brass. He didn't trust his own intelligence apparatus because of the Bay of Pigs. And he also had an intense granular knowledge of what was happening and a curiosity about it. And he was able, that gave him the capacity to stand up to an intransigent bureaucracy. And I do not think that President Trump has that quality. I hope he does now. Maybe he's gained it in the interim, but I don't, I haven't seen that from him.
It seems that way. But he was so new to it, I mean,
Yeah.
that you can't calculate how evil some of these people in our government are.
Yeah.
And I was kind of heartened. I was excited, and I wanted to talk to you about when they overturned the Chevron doctrine. I thought that's about the best thing that's happened in 100 years here, because that sort of cancels the authoritarian state, and their NGOs that I don't think that it's hit people maybe yet, but I thought that was just so great, because I thought that's kind of what's needed, because people are running our country that have never signed an oath to the Constitution or to our country at all. It's faceless bureaucrats, right? And, these authoritarian unelected positions like SES and stuff, they're making all the moves. So I don't even know if a president could defy them until they overturn that. Now I think maybe it's a new...
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff the president could do, even with the Chevron doctrine. And the Chevron doctrine, to me, is a double-edged sword. Because if the agencies are functioning as they're supposed to, as public welfare agency,
but they're not.
No, they don't. Now they've all been taken over by corporations, and now they have this unconstitutional power. And the person who brought that suit is a friend of mine. I've represented commercial fishermen my whole life, and that's where I got my start, representing commercial fishermen. It was a fisherwoman who brought that case. Two companies that represent commercial fishermen who brought that case, and I think it is at this point in history, it's a net positive, because with all the power, these agencies are no longer representing our interests. They are now sock puppets for the industries they're supposed to regulate.
It's so, but it seems that it's getting clearer and clearer, and the big disguise and the big cover-up thing, that veil is thinning, for people in our country to see, man, this is all just one big yank. It seems like more and more people are getting hip to that it's not two parties, and it's not of, by, and for the people in any way. It's just corporate self-interest, and everything they do is to protect themselves from any sort of judgment or any kind of responsibility or accountability.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think I'm not as optimistic about how many Americans recognize it. I think the mainstream media.
Oh, please fake it with me, because I get so depressed that nobody gets it.
Everybody else is still in the psyop, or a lot of people.
How would we break it?
I don't know how you unravel an orthodoxy, because even you and I were talking about this earlier, that you have a family member who is very badly injured by.
But we don't talk about it.
The COVID vaccine. I'll talk about it in a veiled way, but even people who are severely injured, have a hard time saying that's probably what did it, because they were, it was such a tribal battle at the time, and
it broke up families. Mine.
Yeah. And so I was curious from the beginning as how does this orthodoxy ever unravel? Because the information doesn't do it. People are totally impervious to facts. And, a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist, I said to them, how do you persuade somebody who is completely subsumed in that kind of religious-like belief system?
Yeah.
Because if you challenge somebody on their religion, it just makes them dig in.
Yeah.
And he said that's the exact thing for every orthodoxy. That's a feature of every orthodoxy, that it's impervious to facts. It's impervious to any kind of external stimulus. And that he said the only way that you can do it is through the Socratic method of you don't fight back, you just ask questions. And if as long as you keep doing that and you don't fight them on it, but just say, you know, are you, is that this what you expected the benefit to be from it, you know? And is that working for you? And to do it in a way that's gentle and non-confrontational, so that you get, so that people maybe are stimulated to begin asking questions on their own, rather than thinking that you know, they have to be defensive about
Yeah, they
this.
have to defend.
It's called
yeah.
cult
Yeah.
breaking. That's
What?
it's called cult breaking. What you're talking about.
It's called code breaking.
cult breaking.
Cult breaking.
Somebody's in a
breaking.
cult. There's these cult breakers. They go in, and that's one of the techniques they use. That's a real thing, because they're in a cult, and you have to open their mind. It looks like we have to do that to a lot of Americans.
But you
actually.
can't threaten them, because then they get really defensive.
Yeah,
And then they really shut down. So that's what you just said, basically.
yeah, and you can't assault them with facts.
No.
Yeah,
And
it's
they're
like a
offended
word.
by facts. They go, well, those are your facts. That's
Yeah.
what they say. Well, those are your facts, but they're not my facts. I mean, it's just, it's so sad to see that happen to Americans, but it's like been in planning for a long time, I think, to make a docile, you know, a country of docile. I used to think it was for docile workers, but they don't even want nobody to work. It's just docile prey.
Yeah.
So you'll take more and more, and then they're going to come out. And it seems like, what do they do? Invent, I mean, it's so evil. I just
Well, you know,
see it as
one
evil.
of the interesting experiments that came out of MK Ultra is called the Milgram experiment. And the Milgram experiment, there was a Yale associate professor named Stanley Milgram, and he recruited about 70 people from every walk of life in New Haven: business people, students, working people, blacks, whites, etc. And he would bring them in to take part in this experiment, and he would put them at a table like this, and on the table there was a dial, and they were told that the dial was connected to a man who was sitting in the next room, who was tied to a chair, and that when they twisted that dial, it would administer an electric shock, and that they were doing an experiment on him, right?
Right.
They didn't tell they were doing the experiment on you.
Right.
And they were told by a guy who was a doctor, so a doctor was really Dr. Milgram, who was in a white lab suit, and he had, you know, kind of badges on him that made him look like an authority figure. And he would tell them, okay, turn it up, turn it down, turn it up, turn it down. When they turned it up, they could hear the guy struggling and screaming and sometimes pleading and crying. And a lot of the subjects were saying, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, can I stop? And the doctor would say, no, you can't. And he'd say, turn it up. And I think 67% of it, you could actually, you shouldn't go to Wikipedia for anything controversial, but you can look this up in Wikipedia. I think, and it's called the Milgram experiment. 67% turned it up to where it said potentially lethal.
Yeah.
And which is like 250 volts or something.
God.
And what Milgram said is that the voice of an authority figure has the capacity to overwhelm all of your most deeply held beliefs and ethical precepts for the normal person.
Yeah.
That they will, if somebody who they believe in as authority tells them to do something that they know is wrong, they're going to do it. The good news is,
Well, they think they're off the hook. It's like, you know,
yeah,
it's like a Hannah Arendt's thing, the banality of evil. If they think, well, I'm only following orders, so I'm not going to be held responsible for my own actions.
yeah, I mean, that's interesting. And but the good news is that 33% of them got up and walked out.
That is good.
And that is roughly that, you know, what we saw during COVID, because COVID, seemed to me from the beginning a giant Milgram experiment where we had a
I thought
doctor
so, too.
and, all these doctors who were assembled at the top of the society, and they were telling people to do things that we all knew were wrong, to censor the press, to do what you're told, trust the experts. Okay.
Mhm.
That was never a thing. That trusting the experts is not a feature of democracy. It's not a feature of science. It's
No.
a feature of totalitarianism,
Right.
and it's a feature of religion.
Right.
But it's not science to
No,
trust the
it
experts.
it felt like a big old psyop.
Yeah.
Yeah, where everybody falls in line. That mass formation stuff. Remember the Super Bowl when what's her name, Beyonce came out and her song was Mass Formation just before all of it came down.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, her.
Well,
and-
how do you explain that?
Well,
In
because
a
they always
non-paranoid way, please, Roseanne.
in a non-paranoid way. Well, I don't know if I.
You're
can
the
do it.
wrong podcast
I'm not
for
even
that.
paranoid. I just no, it's not paranoid. It's like I just connect different dots.
Yeah.
And I am paranoid because I grew up with Holocaust survivors. So I don't know if you'd call that paranoid or some other thing, but it looks like a lot of the same shit to me.
Yeah.
And yeah.
But
the-
so this was
media
before. When was
always-
this? This was like in the Super Bowl in 2020,
The half-
January of 2020.
no, it was way before that.
Are you saying, was the song called that, or what are you talking? I don't
That
remember.
was the name of the song she did.
Oh, I have to look that
And,
up.
It
yeah,
was
look
called
it up.
Mass Formation.
Yeah. And it was her, it was, kind of a call to arms for mass formation. And you just look it up. And
So I mean, what do
because,
you?
The
because
song's
the
called
media
Formation.
always telescopes a message to the people that watch the Super Bowl at halftime. You knew that, right? Or
I
you
didn't
don't?
know that.
Oh, okay.
The song's called Formation.
Yeah.
I looked it
And
up.
look at, formation, but look at what
I'll
it's
have to watch
about.
it
We'll
later.
drop it in
Yeah,
later.
we'll do it later. I was just
Yeah.
They're
verifying
in
in real time.
military. They're in militaristic
So
outfits.
I don't put
can
anything
you
past
give me
anyone.
some other example of the Super Bowl functioning as a conduit for
Well, you saw the
CIA
Olympics.
and for what?
You saw the Olympic opening the other day in France. I mean, there's stuff like that.
You mean the Olympic had all of the
Just symbolism in general.
symbolism of it?
It's a way
yeah.
I would consider they would communicate to us. I mean, that could be
Yeah,
our thing,
that
right?
was that
Weird,
was
right?
Strange, yeah, very.
But
strange
all the
choice.
Super Bowls have that. They all have a kind of a cultish,
all the music videos.
occultish message to them about overthrowing anything that is American values, like Madonna dressing like a death cult goddess and all the people half naked around her. Just watch the last 5 Super Bowl halftimes.
Well, how do you explain that I put my ad on the Super Bowl this time?
Well, I did a couple Super Bowl commercials and they were great, but that you weren't singing and dancing. It's for the youth.
You didn't have
Now,
any
if you
symbolism
came out
in
there
there,
in
did you?
a-
I didn't notice
If you
it.
came out there in a big old headdress
And a thong.
and a thong with
Devil
like
horns.
satanic imagery all around you, that you could say something.
Well, you might have
but-
got the Democratic nomination had you done it.
Yeah, what about that? Why did these people always gripe about the our democracy, and they got anything but democracy, or they would have chosen you, which pisses me off, because you are the Democrat Party, because your family is the Democrat Party, but they don't like any of that, and they went so far left that I can't even understand them. But then they pick everybody. I said
Yeah,
they
had
shot
to
it
destroy democracy in order to save it. from
exactly
Donald
like
Trump.
Vietnam, right?
Yeah,
But I said, they shot at Trump and killed Biden.
yeah, interesting.
But they all just work together. It's just like this crazy message they keep, like you said. They just want us fighting laterally. Like the Torah says, when a man hits a dog with a stick, the dog goes bites another dog. That's what it is.
Yeah, well, that's true.
But what about the Democrat Party totally overturning democracy in the people they install that their own constituents don't want? What the hell kind of overturn of democracy is that? Does that make you mad?
I mean, my reaction um, is not to get mad because I've you know I don't think I think I'm disciplined about not going into anger.
That's good.
And I think anger is most people have two ways of handling anger, and one is to externalize it, in which you kick the dog, and then a week later, somebody is beating their wife in China because it reverberates around that
I get it.
externalized
I
anger
get it,
reverberates around the globe. And then the other way is to internalize it and turn it into a resentment, which is like swallowing poison and hoping somebody else will die. And that, I don't want to go into either of those places. So I have other ways of processing when I see something that doesn't make any sense or that's unjust, which is, to try to apply my energies against it, but also not do something that is destructive either to myself or people around me. And you kind of have to embrace adversity and see it as an opportunity for personal growth.
That was going to be my next question, because I think that a lot of people who do have anger things, it comes from trauma and not really processing the trauma that you had gone through. Anger is definitely a sign of impotence. It's a sign that you didn't. I agree with you there, but sometimes it does drive you to action. To correct.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say
action.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the most, one of the great New Testament stories is Christ going in and over to getting angry.
Yeah.
And overturning the tables of the money changers at the temple. And so, I think anger is a motivation, but for me, it's not. For me, anger is not it's a destructive. It's not something that I try not to go into either rage or resentment.
Well, you had so much trauma in your life and your family. How did you turn that to be? How did you deal with it and turn it so that you could work for the betterment of humanity and not let it take you down?
I think the way that I processed trauma for 14 years was through heroin addiction. And that was from when I was 15 years old, which was a year after my dad died, until I was 28.
I'm so sorry. I didn't know that about you.
Oh, yeah. So, and that's pretty well known. I mean, I'm very open about it. And then I've been in recovery for 40 years. And but I'm very disciplined about my recovery. I go to a meeting every day.
Oh, wow.
And I already was at a meeting this morning, and I do that every day of my life. And I think that you have to work on it.
Yeah.
So I had to have a very intense spiritual realignment that I think has enabled me to take that trauma and actually turn it into something good for me, to turn it into good energy. And I think that's our function in life is to create order out of chaos and to transform the misfortunes and the challenges in our lives into something that benefits other human beings. I think that's what comedians do. They take trauma, they take hurt, they take injury, discomfort, and they turn it into laughter, and that,
it's an alchemical mix. It's a great alchemical mixture of all kind of emotional triggers and stuff that saved my life since I was a little girl. Like, I never would have survived if I didn't have jokes and the ability to write them and go, okay, I'm going to take this premise, this context, this is good. And sometimes I would be like, you know what? All comics say this. this is horrible and hurts, but I'm going to get a good 2 minutes out of it. And that's how we do it. It's
Yeah.
a great
Well,
survival.
when you're in recovery, like, when I was out there, when I was an addict, a lot of my mind, I was thinking, oh, I already squandered all of these, wonderful gifts I was given. So what's the point? But then I found out when I came into recovery that I could take, the worst parts of my addiction, the humiliation and the defeats and the disappointments and, the embarrassments and all that, and I could turn it into something that could help somebody else. And if somebody says to me, oh, I've been through this struggle, I can say to them, yeah, I went through that too, and there's a path out. And so it actually has this extraordinary impact of this sort of alchemy of being able to mint something very, very valuable from something that was very, very bad from the dross to mint gold from dross,
Yes, exactly. The 12-step things, I know, but that was something that meant a lot to me too, because boy, isn't that 12 steps to rebuilding the soul of a human being?
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's like step by step.
Yeah.
I will first I will grow it, and then I will hold myself to account. And that's hard.
And then I'll share it.
Yeah.
And that's the key, I think Bill Wilson, who, launched AA, which was the first 12-step program, he recognized, he had heard through Carl Jung. So he had a best friend whose name was Roland Hazard, who was a millionaire from Boston during the Depression. He was one of the richest people in the country, and he was an absolutely hopeless alcoholic. And he went to Switzerland to be treated by Dr. Jung, and he got cured, and then he left and immediately drank again. And he came back and got cured again. He immediately drank again, and he came back. And finally he said to Jung, for somebody of my level of alcoholism, is there any hope? And Jung said, give it to me straight. Just give it to me straight. Hazard said this to Jung, and Jung said, no, it's hopeless. And Roland Hazard said to him, is there anybody who's ever recovered who has this level? And Jung said, yeah, but only people who have profound spiritual realignments. Right. And Hazard shared that with Bill Wilson, and Bill Wilson began a correspondence with Jung. Bill Wilson then went into a program called the Oxford Group, which was a group that was it was a group that at the beginning of the century there was a movement called Gnosticism, which was the move back to first century Christianity before there was any institutional church, when there was no priests, there was just people who were going into basements, sharing the message of love, of kindness, of hope for the poor. And that's how original Christianity spread before the Roman Empire took it over and turned it into an instrument of empire and control.
Right.
This was a movement to go back to that time. And Jung, or Bill Wilson, went into this group. There were 8 steps, and they were designed to induce a spiritual awakening. He had a spiritual awakening, and his compulsion for alcohol just was lifted. He had struggled with it his whole life. Miraculously, it was gone. It was like he was never an alcoholic. And he was free, and he began rebuilding his fortune and having a wonderful life. And he was a business guy from Wall Street, and he went out to, he was arranging a deal that was going to make him rich for life during the Great Depression. He was going to buy the Firestone Tire Company. And he went out to Akron, Ohio to ink the deal. And he was going to come away a millionaire. And he got out there, and the deal fell apart. And he was in Akron in the Mayflower Hotel after this whole crushing. He'd invested his whole fortune. He was penniless. He couldn't even get back to New York. And he was devastated. And for the first time, the entire compulsion came flooding back in him, and he just needed a drink. And he was sitting standing in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel, and he was looking at the lounge or the bar, and he could hear the clinking of ice in the glass, and he could hear the laughter of the people, and it was calling him to come into that bar. And on his way to the bar, there was a telephone booth, and he suddenly had this revelation that the only way that he was going to stay sober that night is if he helped another alcoholic. Yeah. And he went into the phone booth, he went into the Yellow Pages, and he started calling the Salvation Army, he started calling preachers, ministers, hospitals, looking for a desperate alcoholic that he could go help. And he found this guy through a local preacher. He found a guy named Dr. Bob Smith, who was a well-known alcoholic, a very popular physician, but had been devastated. And he actually arranged a meeting. The people arranged a meeting at the home of the heir to the Firestone Tire fortune. And he went into that, and Dr. Bob, who, hundreds of people had tried to cure him. He saw Bill Wilson come in, and he said, "You got 15 minutes." And they ended up staying up all night together. And that was the first AA meeting. And they both got sober, and then they realized the only way they could stay sober is if they helped somebody else. So they started going around, and then the program began, and the first meetings began in Akron. But he realized that the secret sauce of this program was that the 12 steps are intended to induce a spiritual awakening.
Yeah, because it's like based on brutal honesty with
right,
yourself.
Brutal honesty, but that you cannot live off the laurels of that awakening. You have to renew it every day, and the only way to renew it is by helping somebody else through service to others. So that's why 40 years into the program, I still go to 9 meetings a week, because that gives me the opportunity to help somebody else. And that's the only way that you keep it.
It's reminding me of basic things about Judaism, which we're taught. We're taught that everybody is born here, that this is the world of desire, and that we are desire. A human is about desire. Our body.
What do you mean desire?
Well, we desire things by being human. We desire comfort. We desire food. We desire, but that there's two kinds of desire: desire for myself alone, and desire for myself in order to share, which that's the spiritual one, and the other one makes you sick. Yeah. So that's kind of the spiritual awakening. But I work 12-step programs too for mental health. There's an anonymous programs for people who have mental health issues. And it just is all based on it's all the same thing, but that rigorous honesty. Yeah. That'll wake you up in your parts and your soul more than anything. And it's so difficult. So congratulations on your sobriety. And I can see that it runs through your campaign too, because you have a very, it's almost Gnostic in the way I view it. You have a desire to enlighten and to lift and to help the people of this country and to bring them together.
I love what you said about desire, because one of the sort of central tenets of Buddhism is the path to enlightenment, which is called nirvana. Mm-hmm. And that word means quenching the fire, putting out the fire of desire, the fire for pleasure, for sex, for to avoid pain, to accumulate wealth, that all of these desires that are, I called myself, when I was active addict, I was a bundle of appetites that needed to be fed all the time. Yeah. That was a full-time job. And that the ultimate trajectory and objective of Buddhism is this stage of enlightenment where you're free of all desires, where it's like sitting on the side of a mountain and watching the clouds pass overhead. Some of them are dark, some of them are white, but just being still and not being compelled to respond,
Right,
to learn. You know,
exactly.
in Isaiah says a passage of Isaiah that had a monumental impact on me early in sobriety was, "Be still and know that I am God."
Oh, yeah, I love
Because
that too.
my, you know, I was like a big truck, right? When I was that is stuck in a ditch and it's smoking and the headers and the pipes are, you know, there's fire coming out and it's roaring and the wheels are spinning and it's going nowhere.
Mhm.
And I had to fix everything. I had to, you know, if there was pain, I had to fix it with a drug or whatever. I had to, anything. I was in constant movement. I was all activity and no progress. And what sobriety and the 12 steps has taught me is just how to be still, that I don't need to fix those, that God is in charge, and that, you know, what other people think of me is not my business.
Right.
My business is to get up every morning and say, "Reporting for duty, sir," and then use and figure out what I'm supposed to do. Keep doing the next right thing,
That's
and
right.
that if I'm sad, it's going to pass. If I'm, you know, all of the desires, the needs that come into me, that they pass. You know, if I'm depressed or whatever, that those things all pass. And that if I can be still and have faith, that it's like, you know, it's like I can put down the oars and hoist the sails and I get propelled, you know, by divine wind from behind.
Divine wind,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, it's self-mastery, isn't it?
Yeah.
After a lifetime of, I can't imagine the trauma that in your family, and we all witnessed it, so you had no place to do it in private, but self-mastery at the end of it, and then rising to be a person that people look to and learn from. And you have so many important things to say, and you've said so many great things. I was happy when Trump consulted you as the health expert on vaccinations, and of course we heard that leaked conversation between you and he, which I loved, because I love when you and he are in agreement. Of course, I wanted him to pick you for vice president, but whatever.
Was that ever offered, or
Well, he
can't tell.
doesn't.
You know what? I can't really talk about
can't
the
talk
details.
Sorry, I
You're
had to-
nosier than me. I got to
I had
keep
to ask.
him in line now.
I had to
Yeah,
ask.
no, it was. But
That's what I was rooting for. So
We wanted
Yeah.
that.
you don't have to answer all this.
I wouldn't have a big interest in being vice president.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's a post that doesn't have any power.
Yeah.
Your budget is controlled through the White House.
Well, unless you were Kamala. Unless you're Kamala.
Yeah, unless you have a very close relationship with the president.
Or you just write a letter.
But Kamala, what did she was given a portfolio to fix the border.
She's done great.
She's done a great job.
Well,
She's done a great job on the border there, hasn't she?
Well, according to
She's
Google, it
amazing.
never happened.
Well,
they're,
yeah,
they're
she says
suppressing
now.
it.
is
That's
that
the
what
way.
the Google now
Yep.
says?
If
And
she,
they don't-
Such liars.
They're the
I know.
worst. They're the worst. That's what I got to ask you a quick question. The media has done a hit piece on you since the beginning. They've done it, most Americans that are sane and rational. Does that? How do you keep running a campaign? You're in all 50 states. You're on the ballot. You have a path to victory. I want to talk about that, but it's really hard for you. It's not just because you might steal from the Republican or Democrat, which a lot of people say. I think the issue you're running into is the media is not propelling you at all, or talking about you. You've kind of been shadow banned. I don't know if you know what that term is. Does that?
Yeah,
How do you keep going with that?
I think my biggest issue is that the mainstream media will not let me on.
yeah,
They won't let me talk. And, you know, if you remember when Ross Perot ran, he was on every night.
Everything, yeah.
He was every night he was on, and he got 19% of the vote. And but he was on Larry King like
Mhm.
2 nights a week, and then he was everywhere. And in 18 months, I've had 2 interviews on mainstream media. I've had only one live interview, which is Aaron Burnett. This week, I did CBS with Major Garrett, and it was a taped interview. And as you know, they can mess
Yeah,
around with the tape
yeah.
interviews. But and then I had 2 small interviews on CNN with Michael Schmerkanish. But other than that, I'm completely banned on those networks. And then I'm shadow banned on, Facebook, et cetera. And so, it's enabled the mainstream media to characterize me as a crazy person, as anti-vax, as,
That's what they do.
as dog eating, as racist, as anti-Semitic, all this stuff they put on you unfairly. You're Jewish, and you were thrown off TV for being anti-Semitic, supposedly.
I'm racist for that one. It changes week,
whatever.
Yeah, every week it's something else.
Yeah.
Right, and so they use those pejoratives to marginalize you and to vilify you, to demonize you, and to make people feel, oh, I don't have to listen to him. He's a crazy person.
Right.
Well, they do it to blacklist you for their other venues. Won't go, oh, well, they're blacklisted, so we can't have them on.
Yeah.
It's like, they're all lined up in formation. And if they can do that to you, then nobody else is going to have anything to do with you either.
Yeah.
It's just, it's Stalinism. Did you ever see that movie about Stalin? It was so funny. It has all these comics
Was
in
the
it.
death of Stalin?
I think it was, where they were all just like...
That was a great movie.
Wasn't it great?
Fantastic.
That's how I imagine it is in the government. Would you really want to be in there?
Well, I think I'm more able to fix it than anybody alive right now, because I'm a unique position. I've litigated against all these agencies. So I've sued USDA more than anybody. I've sued EPA, FDA, EPA, NIH. I've sued DOT. I've sued Department of Agriculture. All of them. And I just won a big suit against the FCC for lying to the public about cell phone radiation. When you sue them, you get a PhD in corporate capture. And I know in many of these agencies, I know who the bad guys are. I know who to move. I know the perverse incentives that put agency capture on steroids. And I'm not scared of the bureaucracies. Most people, like President Trump, came in and he said, I'm going to drain the swamp. But then he brought in, Scott Gottlieb, a business partner of Pfizer, to run FDA. Gottlieb did a $100 billion favor for FDA and then went back to Pfizer. Alex Azar, a pharma lobbyist, to run HHS. A Verizon lobbyist to run FCC. A Goldman Sachs CEO to run the Treasury Department. A military contractor to run the Defense Department. A coal industry lobbyists to run EPA, and oil industry lobbyists to run Interior. So, and I understand why he did that, because those people, you have these huge bureaucracies, some of them 40, 50,000 people, and at every level of that bureaucracy, some technocrat who doesn't like what you're doing has the capacity to perform, to commit a civil disobedience that will embarrass the president. Shut the lights off somewhere, shut the trash service off, put farmers out of work, shut the water off for an entire, whatever it is, they can really hurt you. So most presidents who, come in, they bring somebody safe with them, somebody from the industry that's regulated, who can keep everything in line. But it's the opposite of draining the swamp. Putting John Bolton as the head of NSA is not going to end the military-industrial complex. He is the military-industrial complex. Oh, I wouldn't do that. I know how. I'm not intimidated by the bureaucracies. I know how to fix them. They're going to be very intimidated by me. I know how to fix the CIA. I know how to
would you fix the CIA? I mean,
I would do exactly what my dad was going to do, which is to separate the espionage division from the clandestine services. They should be 2 separate agencies, so that they can. So espionage is not tied into all of these things. So there's accounting done. You account for the blowback. The CIA right now, they kill out terrorists in Afghanistan with a drone strike, and they say that's a success story. Well, he's got 12 brothers.
Right.
So now they're going to come after us. And is that really a success story? Is it a success story to get rid of Saddam Hussein? The CIA will
No.
tell you that was a huge success. Well, what happened? Iraq is worse off than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. We pushed Iraq into a proxy posture with Iran, which was exactly the foreign policy outcome we've been trying to avoid for 2 decades.
Right.
We created ISIS. We drove 4 million refugees up into Europe and destabilized every democracy in Europe and created Brexit. We created BRICS, which is now about to take the dollar away from us as the global reserve currency, which is going to be trillions of dollars in wealth extraction by other nations from the United States,
Right.
total the middle class. That's what we got for overthrowing Saddam Hussein. But the CIA still regards that as one of its greatest success stories. And nobody is counting the cost of blowback.
No, they never do.
Right.
They never, and when they do calculate the cost, they never include the cost to human lives or communities in any
Of course not.
Just the cents.
Yeah. So, I mean, they did the same thing. Guatemala, they overthrew Jacobo Arbenz in 1953, and Guatemala has never recovered. We are still getting refugees at the border because of what we did there in 53. We destroyed the first democracy in the 4,000-year history of Iran in 1954 when we overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh, and we're still paying the prices today of that coup d'état with our relationships with Iran. We should be best friends with Iran. The Iranian people are just like the American people, more than anybody in the region except for Israel.
Right.
We should be best friends with them. And instead, and we were during, a lot of the Cold War.
That's really why I got fired. That was really what my tweet was
happened?
about. Well, I had gone to Israel, and it was all everything, and we were in Israel, and our phones rang, and it was pretty staggering. We were on a, what do you call it, where you go?
Conference call?
No, we were on our mission
Mission.
to go to the holy sites. I can't remember the word for it, but
Pilgrimage?
Like a pilgrimage.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, that. And our phones rang, our cell phones, and it was people in Iran. And they were like, hi. And we're like, we didn't think to say, how'd you get our numbers? We were staggered. They go, this is such and such from Iran. They spoke English, and some spoke Hebrew too. And there were 4 of us that got the calls, and they said, we just want you to know we love the Jewish people. We have no problem with Israel. Our problem is with we just want you to know that we love you. We send you love, and our problem is here, not with you. And we don't, what they're saying about both of us, let's not let this go. And so I started talking with them and with journalists in Iran about the Iran deal of the Obama administration. And that's what I was tweeting about for 3 months, about the effect of the Iran deal on Iranian women. That's who I was speaking with. And so, my tweet was, they monitored it and found the one thing that they could use to call me racist. But it was about how, they destroyed all, like they're doing here now, they destroyed all the middle-class women business owners there. It's by the book, the destruction of a country, and then they put in extremists with no women's rights at the top, So they destroyed those women, and they did it in Egypt too. And now they're doing it here. It's the same assault on women as a class and middle and working class people for a elitist group of oligarchs, and everybody's their serf. And that's why I referenced the movie I referenced, because they were coming to throw any woman who could read, write, had a college education, her business was taken away. I mean, Americans don't even know it. But Anyway, I just love them. I love those people in Iran, and one thing you might be interested in is that in Iran and China, people are converting to Christianity like it's a pandemic. It's just amazing numbers. And that's why those places are changing. They're having a spiritual awakening too, of self-accountability. That's kind of what's going on all over the planet.
There's a genocide against Christians across the entire Mideast.
Yeah.
I mean, literally millions of Christians have been eliminated from those countries.
And Africa too.
Yeah, Nigeria, I think 50,000 have been killed in the last couple of years.
Well, they represent a significant threat because they are thinkers and they've had a spiritual awakening. So sometimes I feel like anybody who's a believer or has deep spiritual, like you said about your anger will cause anger in the world, that kind of thinking, they don't like that. The people at the top who just want to control and whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not even thinking about it. Maybe they're just so out of control, they don't see where it heads. Maybe they're just so selfish and self-consumed, they don't even see, but I don't know.
It's
But
like
I
the
do know.
collective ego.
Huh?
It's like the collective ego. It's, the ego is kind of it's self-will run riot. It's, it's the source of all this strife and an anger and war and everything else.
Do you think those are vestigial things that might be passing from the human?
I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I mean, I don't. I think every generation has to struggle with them, and that technology amplifies, the capacity for ego domination to dominate all of society. And, I think that technology has an incredible promise, like AI and blockchain, to make government more transparent, to make it more the servant of the best impulses of our society, to democratize us, the same way that the internet would. But the internet promised it was going to democratize information. And what did it do? It became a tool for totalitarian control.
Yeah.
And AI has an even more frightening potential to completely control us, to warp our perception of reality, to distort it in ways that are highly manipulated, and to control every aspect of human behavior, all of our interactions, what we do inside and outside of the home. And I mean, they're already harvesting our information. We have Siri and Alexis in our home. They're not working for you. They're working for Bill Gates, who's,
right.
Every time you cough, every time you sneeze, every time you say something to your wife about, this mattress is a little bumpy, I need a new one. Then you get 6 mattress ads in the morning. Have
you ever tried swearing at Siri? No, it's Alexis that you swear at, right?
Oh, what happens?
She gets all offended. It's pretty amazing.
How did you discover that, Roseanne?
Because I just tried it. Because I go, hey, you know what I think of you? You're a so-and-so and so-and-so. She goes,
I mean, was it at a time when you were angry at her?
No, I was trying to spy. I was being a spy on all the spying. So I go, hey, you're this and that. And she goes, that is offensive. Or I can't remember what she said. But anyway, I want to.
You stopped her from talking
We
about
have
that.
to wrap up. I got that.
I know, we are
'Cause
wrapping up.
I wanted to hear more about
Well,
that.
and change
I'll
your
tell you
flight
off
and
air.
stay. We would love you. I can
No,
have you here all day.
she said that's very offensive, and she said something like, I wish you wouldn't feel the need to swear at me like that, Roseanne Barr at so and so. I don't know.
Did you use your first and
No,
last?
I added
Social
that.
Security.
So I wanted to give you the floor to, and I ask everybody, give us your most, because I'm hopeful, because I think when when the dirt's right out in the open, it's good because you can't sweep it under the carpet anymore. You got to sweep it out the door when you see it. So I think it's good that all this stuff's being exposed. I feel hopeful that we'll see it and then choose not to keep it in our house anymore. So I ask everybody to end our interview, which was just delightful, and you're a wonderful person. Would you leave us with a hopeful, your hopeful thoughts for our country and the world?
Yeah, and I agree with you that, the way you get rid of cockroaches with sunlight, they're not going to come out, and that, we need transparency, and we need democracy. But listen, I think it's a division in this country that's being used to make sure that the control stays in the hands of this corporate elite. They use division, they use fear, they use tribalism, they use all these alchemies of demagoguery, these mechanisms for control to keep us at each other's throats so that we don't see what they're doing. And my whole campaign is about ending the division. I never say bad things about President Trump. I criticize him on his policies, but I'm not disrespectful to him. I always call him President Trump. I say the same thing about President Biden, Vice President Harris. I promised on day one, 18 months ago, that I wasn't going to feed into the division, the marginalization, the vilification, the demonization, the dehumanization of my opponents, that we're all Americans.
Right,
and
that's
there's
true.
no such thing as Republican children and Democratic children. And that I was going to focus my campaign not on these little culture war issues that are used to keep us at each other's throats and disable our capacity for democratic governance and participation, but to focus on the values that we all have in common. And what I've found is that Americans are in agreement on 90% of the issues.
Yeah,
we
right.
all want to take care of the veterans. We all want to restore us to the best education system in the country. Everybody wants to take care of the environment. If you talk about air, water, wildlife, fisheries, public lands, the Purple Mountains majesty, everybody wants it. If the only thing you're going to talk about is carbon, you're going to lose people. You're going to have people at each other's throats. But when we did when we were working against to clean up the water, the lead from the water in Flint, Michigan, we had Hell's Angels standing shoulder to shoulder with urban blacks. Everybody wants a clean environment.
Right, of course.
Right? Everybody wants that. Everybody wants to end the corrupt merger of state and corporate power. Everybody wants to end the war machine. We want to bring that money home and rebuild our industrial base. We want dignity for everybody, black, white. We all want that. And so much of what the political parties are doing is sowing the division of turning blacks against whites, of turning us against each other in so many
I
different
think
ways.
it's just fundraising. They're using everything as a tool for fundraising.
Oh, I know the fundraising stuff that I get in the mail is so outrageous.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it's addressed against me. They'll say, "Dear Robert Kennedy is a menace to our society. Send us money so we can stop him." And I'm like, I'm not gonna. But that's where I draw the line. But we have the capacity to, we listen. We have the worst problems of any country in the world. We have the worst chronic disease epidemic. 60% of our kids now have chronic disease. When my uncle was president, 6%. But we also have the best integrative medicine doctors in the world. We have the best functional medicine doctors, the naturopaths, all the extraordinary chiropractors. And we have the worst agricultural policies, the most poisonous food. But we also have the greatest farmers in the world who are doing regenerative agriculture. We're cutting edge on that. Nobody's doing what we're doing here.
I know that.
We have the worst business practice in the world, but we have the greatest entrepreneurs in the world in this country, right? And so if we give our country a chance, we're generating plenty of wealth. We have this huge budget deficit, but we can get rid of it by reinvesting, not by cutting spending, because you can't just cut your way out of that deficit. You have to grow your way out of it. But we have to realign the spending so it's growing GDP. We can do that. We just need leadership in the White House who understands this and who understands the potential of AI and blockchain. We need to bring those technologies home, make ourselves the hub, bring all that entrepreneurial energy, that innovation, and the capital investment here in the United States, and make us the fulcrum, the hub of it. And we can restore the America that I grew up with, that owned half the wealth on the face of the earth, that was a moral authority around the globe. That was not a war machine, but was instead a mechanism for peace. And, I know how to do it. I grew up in that era. I watched my father, my uncle do it. I've thought about it my entire life. I've litigated against the companies and against the regulatory agencies that are causing the problem, and I know how to fix it.
Where can people go to donate to your campaign or find out more?
People should go to Kennedy24.com. People will tell you we're not going to be on the ballots. We already have enough signatures to get on the ballots in every state. And the only reason we're not on them is because the state laws won't let them certify us till the end of August. But by that time, we'll be everywhere.
You'll be in all 50 states.
Well, we want the restoration and the redemption and the renewal of our country. And, we pray for it every day. I do.
Me too.
I love you. Thank you so much, Roseanne, for being here. It was a great time.
Oh, you see.